All right, well, I guess we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the local rainforest. My name is Cecilia Pacheco Vicente. I'm the Tribal Entrepreneurship Enhancement Program Manager for one of the programs we have here at the local rainforest. And this is part of our programming that we provide for entrepreneurs, business leaders, based on topics of interest that we've received feedback on. So today we have John Boersma with us to present about AI for leaders. Just a little bit about John. He's been helping public and private organizations define and execute successful AI and machine learning projects for about a decade. Most recently, as Director of Education for Beta Robot, John led over 100 leadership workshops to conceptualize, define, and prioritize AI initiatives with clients, including the Bank of America, Walmart Canada, Verizon, PwC, South Africa, and a federal intelligence agency. He also holds a PhD in physics and an MBA in format management. So we're really happy to have him here today. I also wanted to do a brief shout out to the New Mexico Tech Council who co-sponsored this event as part of their AI group that they have. Mia, who's their leader, she was gonna say some words, but she wasn't able to attend, so I just wanted to acknowledge them and their collaboration on this. So without further ado, want to get started?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Boersma, and today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence for leaders, by which I mean we're not going to talk about computer programming. We're not going to talk about algorithms, as much fun as that stuff is. Instead, what we're going to do is talk about the role of an executive in thinking about and implementing artificial intelligence in their organizations and how they should be thinking about both the competitive threat and the opportunity that artificial intelligence represents. Right from the outset, though, I'd like to encourage you to make this as much as possible a dialogue. If you're just burning up with a question, don't wait, just blurt it out, interrupt me. Let's talk about what you want to talk about. That to me is much more important than that if we get through every single slide. But I do want to put a boundary on that conversation. And the boundary that I want to put on it is we're here to talk about the business implications of artificial intelligence. And very often people want to talk about, understandably, talk about the social and cultural and political implications of artificial intelligence, which is really fun to talk about. And I super enjoy talking about that over a beer. But we could go right to the horizon with that and not talk about the practical implications that we're really here to talk about today. So within that bound, within that scope of, let's talk about the business implications of artificial intelligence. As I say, let's make this as much as possible a dialogue. And as soon as you got a question or a comment, just raise your hand or just start talking. Just start talking. Okay. Well, of course, it makes sense to start out by defining what we're talking about. What do we mean by artificial intelligence? Well, we could spend time on a more or less philosophical discussion about what we mean that would, I think, be ultimately more or less not super satisfying. So instead, what I want to do, again, to be very practical about it, is describe what I think of as three categories of artificial intelligence that are important to think about if you're a business leader. First, generative AI. Generative AI is where the artificial intelligence system can produce, in response to your request, text, images, computer programs, even music. And this is the stuff that is in the news all the time right now because it is in an enormous period of progress. There are amazing things happening. You hear about this all the time, and with good reason, that this is really amazing stuff, and it's really happening right now in 2024. So this is sort of, if you will, the most famous AI, and maybe what you're thinking about in terms of AI. But I would say there's also another kind of AI, which I'm going to refer to as predictive AI, which sometimes goes by the term machine learning, if you've heard that term, a different kind of AI much more mature, been around more like 5 or 10 years instead of 1 or 2 years. And as I will argue, this actually, my judgment is, this actually is where the vast majority of value in business operations, in most businesses where most of the value is actually created in predictive AI. So we'll talk about that. And then there's robotics, self-driving cars, robots that pick agricultural products, things like that. I'm really actually not going to talk about this, but other than have it on the slide, this is another category of artificial intelligence. Maybe I'll say a couple things about it. Well, we have a new technology, and that means that we're going through a hype cycle. There's a consulting company called Gartner that studies this kind of phenomena, and they've laid out what they describe as the hype cycle. So this could be any new technology. This could be electricity or radio or the internet or PCs, but in this case, it's artificial intelligence. So you have some point where the new technology kicks off, and it's amazing. Everyone's amazed, and then we rush immediately to what Gartner describes as the peak of inflated expectations. And I think probably for generative AI right now, we are more or less at the peak of inflated expectations. And when we're near that peak, for any new technology, lots of silly things happen. Yes?
We have a question online, from Tim Jones. Isn't all AI under machine learning, I think?
Yes. Yes, that is actually correct. And what Kim is referring to is, it's a good point, it's a technical point, but it's true. When we're doing generative AI, and we'll look at some examples, what the generative AI system is actually doing is looking at all the words, for example, that have come before, and then predicting what is the next word. Yeah.
So would the peak of inflated expectations be more from a consumer perspective or a business? I think from a business perspective, a lot of business owners or business people are not as involved in it as more the individual.
I think there's some of each. I'm going to argue, and let's see if you agree by the end of this presentation, that businesses get carried away also. And part of it is the silliness, which you see right now, where every company feels like they have to say that they're AI. And I get tired of it. And when you dig in, sometimes what you find out is sometimes all they mean is we use software, right? I mean, it can be very silly. So I have this example here of, this was a news story on the BBC. AI helps me to make wine for younger drinkers. I mean, no, it doesn't. Right? I mean, do they mean that they're using some arguably AI application in some piece of, yes, yeah, but I mean, without even digging into it, I'll bet you, I mean, this is a grossly exaggerated claim. But yeah, there is a super impressive company that I've heard present here, who again, it's a local phenomenon. You hear companies that are presenting in Albuquerque, and they feel like they have to say, we're Bitcoin, and we're nanotech, and we're AI too. And so, no, I think it is absolutely a part of the business phenomenon. And I'll show you some more examples of that in a little bit. So you go through the peak of inflated expectations, and then ultimately there's disappointment, which leads to what Gartner calls the trough of disillusionment. And arguably, maybe more or less, self-driving cars are here in the trough of disillusionment. I think we pretty well thought that we pretty much have them by now, and we don't. It's interesting to think about why that is, which I think is much more for cultural and political reasons than it is for technological reasons. But probably self-driving cars here are sort of stuck in this trough of disillusionment. Yeah.
We don't have self-driving trains either.
There you go.
Well, we do have Waymo, which is in Arizona, which is a self-driving.
There's more than none. For sure. You know the joke about the the airplane cockpit of the future that's gonna have one pilot and one dog. Yeah, no, you know this? Yeah. So the pilot is there to not touch anything and the dog's there to bite him at the price. Right, okay, well, you go through the trough of disillusionment and then you slowly crawl up the slope of enlightenment, which means we slowly figure out what this stuff is really good for and what it's actually not very good for. It also is just plain getting better while you go through this process until you arrive at what Gartner calls the plateau of productivity. And I view predictive AI as being not the plateau of productivity. Lots of companies are using it to create lots of value, and when I work with companies, this is almost entirely what I'm focused on.
Well, I personally, like for me, I would consider it like a relationship, right? It's all communication between us and the AI, right? And how we have these conversations, which actually gets you what you desire out of the AI, right? And how it's gonna work.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna give you now, we go a little further. Let me offer you this famous quote. Companies have to be racing to build AI or they're going to be made uncompetitive. If your competitor is building an AI and you aren't, they will crush you. Who'd like to guess who said this famous quote? Sometimes I think quotes are his most important product. Yeah, so yes, this is about a 5-year-old Elon Musk quote, which means it's referring actually to predictive AI, not to generative AI. And I don't fully agree with this, that this is transformative technology. There will be winners and losers. An example of what he's talking about, they will crush you. An example I like to talk about is progressive insurance. So progressive insurance does a lot of progressive things, but one of the things they do is they will show you their pricing and then they'll show you competitors' pricing, right? So this happens to be for homeowners insurance. This is a thing they call Home Quote Explorer. And well, okay, here's our price. Turns out these other guys are more expensive, so so yay, but not always. Sometimes when you're on the progressive site, you get this, oh, what a bummer. No, oh man. Turns out we can't insure you. We feel bad. Look how great these guys are. Look how great USAI. Go over there and buy insurance from them. What's happening there?
Well, they're reviewing your specific information and aligning you with.
We don't want to insure this guy. Oh, darn it. We don't want to insure this guy.
Many claims.
Yeah. So what's happening is that they are forwarding below cost customers to their competitors. That's what we're talking about. They will crush you. If you're better able to model insurance risk than your competitors, you can crush them, vice versa, they will crush you. Yes.
Sometimes they also use that to gather data.
Oh, yeah.
And then they may,
That they're learning.
This is majority of, but
Yeah,
data gathering and this is,
for
a
sure.
big value.
For sure, absolutely. Okay, so now let's talk very specifically about generative AI. Remember, I have 3 categories: generative AI, predictive AI, and robotics that we're not really going to talk about. Let's talk about generative AI. By far the most famous, the best system is one called ChatGPT, and particularly ChatGPT 4.0. How many people have actually ever used this thing? Put your hands on the keyboard.
4.0 or regular?
4.0. Or regular. 4.0. All right. So probably I want to ask any, but yes, 4.0 is significantly better. You have to pay for it, but it's like $20 a month. It's so worth it. It's totally worth it. I encourage all of you that haven't done it to go there. But I want to show you some examples of what you'll see, what you can do and what you'll see. First of all, it generates text. So up here is my prompt. This is what I typed in. Give me a paragraph describing University of New Mexico rainforest innovation. And 2 seconds later, this is what I get. University of New Mexico Rainforest Innovations is the technology transfer and economic development organization for University of New Mexico, and so on. The organization is dedicated to transforming scientific discoveries into practical solutions, leveraging the vibrant research ecosystem and entrepreneurial spirit within the university and the broader Albuquerque community. So it knows we're in Albuquerque. Okay. That's the question. That's the answer. 2 seconds. Some people call this kind of thing the homework apocalypse, right? I mean, how are you supposed to ask kids homework questions when the answer, boom, boom, is right there? Well, I'll give you a couple thoughts on that as we go. One thought is, this is not always right. I was presenting yesterday. I was presenting yesterday at the Albuquerque Metro Rotary Club. And ChatGPT happily told them that their club that was founded in 2009, it happily told them that their club was founded in 1993. And so one of the mistakes, one of the things is, this can be just plain wrong. I think it's probably good to think of it as maybe 95% of the time right, but 5% of the time, it's just flat wrong. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can go a step further. I'll drop in their URL.
Yeah.
So I had a meeting with Rainforest, right? And you drop in their URL, it's gonna go, and I asked, like, it could be Rainforest Innovations or be any company.
Yeah.
And I asked, what are the key values and core principles of this company? What do they believe? What are their ideas?
Yeah.
And it'll literally break it down based on their URL and that information on the website. So it becomes more accurate.
Yeah. It also does images. So in this case, my prompt was, produce an image representing UNM Rainforest Innovations and showing the local landscape. Notice that I did not myself describe the landscape. I'm saying to the system, I want you to figure out what it looks like around here and then create art.
Scary.
Yeah. I mean, it's more or less the Sandias, right?
Yeah.
It's in the south.
I don't think this is quite the building we're in, but it's kind of close. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, I mean, it doesn't quite look like this outside, but you know, I mean, there's some striking stuff here, right?
Well, they might use that now.
Yeah. Now, one thing I would say is that basically every time I produce art like this, the text in the art is bizarrely messed up. So notice here it says very well. Well, no, it doesn't. It says University of New Mexico, and then it says Rainfovations. Rainfovations. That's very often the case. There is a little bit of an issue where text in art is very often messed up, and it's often messed up in this sort of jamming words together way. And I think one way to think about this is the system isn't actually thinking about this as text at all. It's just thinking about it as art. Like, what would you
It's
say?
utilizing Dolly, right?
Yes, that's right. It's interfacing with DALL-E. Yeah.
Via symbol.
Yeah, and it's got, but that, you know, I mean, it's a little messed up here, but it, you know what it is, right? So, you know, there's something that people will say about the state of the art with this, which is that a system like this, sometimes we will say, it will get you 80% of the way there.
Vintage.
Yeah, right. And so, it'll produce text, it'll produce images, it'll produce computer programs. I use it this way all the time. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a quick question about the other side. If you put the request, the word rainforest in quotes, does it make any difference?
I don't know. That'd be a good thing to try. It might.
Yeah, because it's like it's a rain forest,
Yeah.
but this is a rainforest.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. 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 I see what you mean. Maybe so. Okay. This was my prompt. Write a Python script to find the day of the week for October 9 for the first year of each decade of the 20th century. This is the complete computer program that does that. It was returned in a matter of seconds. I pulled it. You see it says copy code here. I just cut and paste it out of ChatGPT into a Python environment, ran it, and this is the output. Boom, 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 right? This stuff, I do use this very, very, very frequently. You know, I mean, if you're a mathy person, I wanted to look at, I'm looking at an old math book and it said, oh, look up the gamma function in a book of tables.
Yeah.
Yeah. So instead, what I said, I went to ChatGPT and I said, write me a computer program in Python that will calculate gamma functions. And you know what? I did not use exactly its output, but just reading, you know, it's like, instead of like Googling around and figuring out the syntax and what library called, it was just right there. Yeah.
Question, did it put the comments in?
Yeah.
That's better than human code.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No. And so, for example, I was doing a program where I wanted to take a matrix to a power, like a matrix to the 10th power, which is a lot of computation. And so, yeah, I just put in a prompt that said, I want a program that will calculate a 2x2 matrix to the 10th power. And it did not hard code. That is to say, it put in a line that said number of multiplications equals 10. And then that came so that you could easily modify it. Yeah. Okay. So I think this is very impressive. These are actually correct. This Sunday, October 9th, 1960, that's the day I was born. That's my birthday. So this is all correct. Sort of.
So do you also find that it does the same thing with code as with other images? You need to be able to proofread it?
Yes, I would say that the reliability on coding has been higher than for text or images. It's really very good, but I would still say it is entirely capable of going off the rails, and you cannot trust it. You need to check. Yeah.
So what kind of expertise people need, like, to proofread it?
You need to, well, in this case, you need to understand Python.
You need to know Python.
Yeah,
So one of the things that I did is I took like businesses or small businesses need ledgers, right?
Yeah.
And we a lot of times rely on a bookkeeper for that, creating our ledgers, right? So whether it's expense report, income statement, stuff like that. I took the ledgers and I actually input that into ChatGPT as a template. And you know how it has my GPTs, right? So you create your own prompted apps and you can actually drop the numbers in there and then tell it what ledger you want. It'll create it. And I told it on the output, create the delivery. So it'll actually create the Excel spreadsheet with your delivery of your numbers.
Yeah. So this is, I think, very impressive. It is in a sense correct, but it is in another sense actually not correct. Does anybody know what I mean when I say this is actually, what do I mean that this is actually not correct? I see you nodding. What do I mean?
Well, so my birthday's October 9th also,
Oh, happy birthday.
but not the same year.
Okay.
I'm way older. So it seems to me that in the coding,
Yeah.
and I can't tell you exactly what it is.
Oh, no, it doesn't quite have to do with that. Yes.
The first year of the decade, isn't 1911, and isn't 1900 the last year of the 18th century?
Yeah. We didn't start counting years with the year zero. We started counting years with year one, right? And so there's this, I sometimes call this sort of fussy, pedantic point that is, that's not a year in the 20th century at all. That's the last year of the 19th century. So but I'm bringing this up not to just be pedantic, but to point out the interesting nature of this mistake. That is to say, it didn't do exactly what we said. You could say, in a sense, it did what we meant. And maybe a better way to say it is, it did what most people would, or at least what many people would mean. Because if you say, how big were the parties on January 1st, 2001? No, the parties, I mean, culturally, emotionally, we're attached to the round numbers like 1900 and 2000. So I just find this is a very interesting example of it is actually not correct, but it is not correct in the way that maybe many people would actually have interpreted and answered the question. And if you make this point of saying, oh, no, that's not, it's a little bit of a fussy point because we know what we mean, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's what school teachers would get you on. So
But that's where I'm talking about the communication between the relationship between you and the AI. If you don't feed it the right information.
So there's bigger problems,
Yeah.
and these bigger problems go by the name of hallucinations. I actually think confabulation would be a better term for this, but the term hallucination is what it's used. So this is now Google's Gemini system, and I asked it to tell me about eating rocks, and it did. It said, "Hey, some say that eating certain rocks can be good for you, but you should avoid eating boulders." That seems like good advice. And then down in here, you can also try hiding small rocks in food like ice cream or peanut butter, right?
Well, I had a cousin who ate her when she's younger. She's very intelligent.
So this is insane, right? I mean, this is insane. And so it's just worth understanding these systems are not always correct, and they can just totally sometimes go off the rails. Here's another example that I just found a couple days ago. How many letters I are there in artificial intelligence? So this is kind of a meta, I mean, like we're asking artificial intelligence about artificial, and it came back and said very confidently, there are 4-letter I's in artificial intelligence. And then all I said was, check your answer, and it came back with, there are 5-letter I's. Well, that's the correct answer, is 5, if you count them up. Okay, so, I mean, what the heck? I mean, this is not a super, well, from a certain point of view, from a human point of view, I mean, this is like a 3rd grade question, right? This is not a crazy, I mean, as opposed to like, write me a Python program that will calculate the data, like that's like a college undergraduate problem, right? This is like a 3rd grader's problem. How many eyes are there in artificial intelligence? And it gets it wrong. It gets it wrong. And so it's just worth keeping in mind that this is the state of the art. And that it is amazing. It does a lot of great things. And as I said, for many applications, it's good and a serious labor saver, getting you 80% of the way to a work product, but you can't yet trust it. You can't trust it yet.
Is this output from
This is
1.0?
This is 4.0 ChatGPT. Yeah. Yeah.
That's because you didn't ask how many O's there are.
And so now we're back to this issue of are businesses in a peak of inflated expectations? Here's a bunch of, these are actual headlines, none of which are older than December. They're all either within the last 6 or 7 months. TurboTax and H&R Block now use AI for tax advice. It's awful. McDonald's to end AI drive-through test with IBM. I like this one. Microsoft says its AI is safe, so why does it keep slashing people's throats? It sort of feels like it might be a headline from 5 years from now. Yeah. What they're talking about is in the art generation software, it's not that hard to produce horrific imagery. And that's what they're talking about here. Even though Microsoft keeps saying, oh, we put safeguards, well, the safeguards don't actually. Air Canada's chatbot debacle will make companies think again about AI. So we were talking earlier, do companies get overexcited? Yes, companies get overexcited and they roll stuff out that is not ready, and then it has to be rolled back. I mean, for me, it's very super easy to sort of picture the boardroom conversations that must have led to this. Oh, we have to be on the lead. We have to get out there. You know, Jim, the CEO, make sure we're on the leading edge of AI. And this is what you get, right? Because this technology, this generative AI technology, is not fully mature. Unlike, as I say, unlike predictive AI. The last thing I want to say about generative AI is where I think it's going. I'm pretty excited about this and trying to watch it as closely as I can. The idea here is you have one of these models, they call large language models like ChatGPT. And then you augment it with your document. This could be like a 1,200-page equipment operating manual or customer service policies or a giant contract or whatever it is. And then the idea is that the system will answer any question about the document. It will use this technology to interpret this style document and then tell you about it. I sometimes think of this as a talking document. And I think this is going to be the next very, very useful thing, is that you'll be able to engage with a document like this. But I call it context bounded. That is to say, you want the system to answer questions correctly. You also want the system to say it doesn't know when it doesn't know. And that's actually a big weakness in these generative AI systems right now. They will give you an answer. I mean, if you play with them, it's essentially never. Well, there are certain contexts where it will say I can't or won't answer, but generally not. You don't want it, like, you wouldn't want to say, okay, this is my talking 1,200-page equipment operating manual. You don't, if you say to the equipment operating manual, who do you think it would be better to win the next presidential election? You don't want it to answer. You don't want it to get into that. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how to operate this piece of equipment. And that too, that context bounding is a problem now. And it's that sort of problem that leads to some of these PR problems is that the systems can just be taken off topic in a way that creates problems. Yeah.
Some leaders advocate that to generate excitement and new products, to encourage employees to come up with 60% solution
Mhm. I
and
think-
or something that range, right?
Yeah.
Don't be perfect before you launch. Okay, with that in mind,
Yes,
if I was to say, okay, want to create
yes.
new products, new ideas, why not use this one and then and try it out rather than being perfect?
I think it really depends on who you are,
Yeah,
and what kind of
yeah,
company
yeah,
you
yeah.
are. This does not feel to me like any of these companies were very happy with this, with the possible exception of Intuit. So TurboTax is one of the 4 or so products of Intuit, like MailChimp and that sort of thing. Everything I've seen about Intuit suggests to me that it is possible that they are just going to ride this out. That is to say, they know it's awful, but they feel like it's the future and they just want to take the pain and have their customers take the pain and trying to get there as quickly as possible.
Well, that's like Tesla. Tesla did the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Their customer service, I worked for Tesla, so their customer service has sucked, but they wrote it out and now they're the top electrical car manufacturer.
Okay, so now let's move on to predictive AI, the much more mature technology. What we're doing with predictive AI is we're going to take something about a business and do a better job of predicting individual outcomes. And when I'm working with a company, very often what I do like to do is go right through their value creation chain. What are all the different steps in the business from from financing the business to sales and so on. And then look for touch points, look for points where we can improve operational results. Maybe if we do better at cash forecasting, when we're going to get accounts receivable, when we're going to have to pay our bills, maybe we can get a little bit of margin improvement from that. What about employee retention? What if we could predict, well, Bob has only a 38% chance of leaving us in the next 6 months, but Susan, there's a 65% chance. Well, why? What are the facts about Susan that leads us to that conclusion? And then maybe we want to do something about that. Better parts inventory management, predicting equipment failures better. Out of the hundreds of applications for predictive AI, this actually is maybe #1 across industries, customer retention, predicting customer churn. Every quarter, we're going to lose some customers. Let's look at all the facts that we have about the customers and predict, is this customer at a relatively higher risk of leaving us? Is this customer at a relatively lower risk? And why? What are the facts about them that lead us to conclude that? Have they been contacting support more often? Have their purchasing volumes been going down? Have they been slow paying their bills? What are the facts that leads us to that conclusion? And then in some cases, maybe we want to do something about it. Maybe we want to lower their prices, improve their service levels, whatever it is that's going to reduce the risk of.
Are you basing this on automated processes or human content?
It's both, right? Because you absolutely could have automated processes, but you could also have prompts to people. It's like, yeah, you just got to call your customer. The intervention may just be, call your customer and see how they're doing, see what they need. Right.
Now, can I ask you on the predictive program, the predictive AI being more mature, you're saying, and
Yeah.
already in the productivity phase?
Yeah.
What is the underlying technology? What's the difference? Because this had to have been programmed, right?
It
And
is.
then now it's just reading data points, whatever you input the data, it's a computer program you had to have generated already, correct?
So let's actually go to an example. It's a very good question. I think this will answer your question because well, first of all, I think the answers to all of your questions are yes. But let me go through this example and I think it will clarify. So what we're doing with predictive AI is we are going to predict something in the future that we have been able to measure in the past. And my particular example here is a tow truck company in the suburbs of Boston. And what they want to do is predict the number of tows they're going to do each day so that they know how to staff. They want to have enough trucks on the road to do all of the tows that need to be done, but not so many that they're just sitting there idle. So it's very valuable to them to accurately predict how many tows they're going to be doing on a particular day. So we now have this historical data table. I'm gonna fill these columns in with numbers in a minute. We have this historical data. This is from last year, 2023. These are, each row is an individual day, an individual number of toes. You see these little dots here at the bottom, that's just meant to indicate there's actually thousands of rows. Maybe we've got like the last 5 or 10 years worth of data, something like that. We want a lot of examples, but this is where we start. We have a table of examples from the past of the thing that we want to predict in the future. Am I going in the, I'm not done, but am I going in the direction of answering your question? Or
I'm just trying to figure out why it's called AI. We probably just programmed the data set to say, hey, check out, here's a big old table of data from the past. And so in this case, you didn't even include weather, but the model might say, there you go. So if you hadn't though, so it's only as good as what you programmed it, the data set you gave it to predict.
Yeah,
That's why it's more mature.
it's predictable.
And then you got the generative AI is based on large language model, which is just everything available to it from the data set of the internet.
It's the same. I mean, it's certainly true that in generative AI, the data being used is typically vastly larger, like trillions of examples instead of thousands of examples. But it's in principle the same. Now, I think one of your questions was, why is this older? Why is this more mature?
Or slightly more better in the arc of,
Well, and I
expectations.
think that you need to marry both because it would change these predictions based on whether a company was using generative AI in their processes and it created more production or performance versus a company that wasn't using it and then predicted their outcomes.
They certainly can work together. I think one of the things maybe at the root of your question is, why do we call this AI? And part of the answer to that question is, why do we call anything AI? Like, what's really the line? As I said, when you dig into it,
like anything computer is artificial.
you know what, if I do get philosophical about it, I think if you went back 100 years and described what a 1960s computer was doing and said, that's artificial intelligence, in 1900, they would have said, yeah, okay. And so part of this is artificial intelligence, to some extent, is just whatever is the most new amazing thing.
Like the Farmer's Almanac could have been artificial, which was just a data set of everything the farmers remembered about what a day did.
Yeah, or mechanical calculators from 300 years ago, right? So artificial intelligence is a word.
Okay.
You remember earlier I said, I'm going to avoid a philosophical discussion and just describe practically. If you want to very specifically say to me, John, I don't think you should call this stuff artificial intelligence, it's not going to be very soon before I'll say, okay, I'm not super attached to that word. It's more about like, what is the actual thing, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're doing here, we're going to do this, like, this doesn't have to be tow trucks. This could be a customer churn model. This could be an employee churn model, hundreds of different applications. It could be if you're working with customs and border protection, how to, predict which box is most likely to have contraband in it. You're always doing the same thing. You're going to create a data table where each row is an example from the past, and then the columns are as many things as you can get that you believe might have some influence on the answer. So we're trying to predict the number of toes. Day of the week matters. Weather probably matters. Whether we're near a holiday, that might matter. Whether we're near the start or stop of daylight savings time. I don't know if you know, but traffic accidents go up in the few days around the beginning and around the end of daylight savings time. And so I know I've left a column here blank. I'm going to show it to you in a moment. But let's say we build a model on these and we do that, and it works pretty well. It actually does a pretty good job of predicting the number of toes on a particular day, except occasionally it does not. And in particular, occasionally it seriously underestimates the number of toes on a Sunday. You see there, we had a Saturday, 55 toes. You might expect that on Sundays there'd be fewer car accidents than on Saturday, but no, it's almost twice as much. Why do you think? Why so many toes on a Sunday?
Unless it's Sunday early morning.
And we're going open the bar. Yeah. An event, Davey, what kind of event?
To get drunk.
Patriots home games. There you go. There you go. Patriots home games. Yeah. And so the reason I use this example is to try to point out that it's not about the data that you just happen to already have. The real power sometimes comes from realizing what data you don't have and that you need to be adding. And if you have a highly technical team of data scientists, it might take them a while to figure out what they're missing here. Whereas on the other hand, you got to edit a tow truck driver and say, how come so many there's Patriots home game? They know, right? And so that's a key management responsibility, is making sure that you're really tightly integrating the business knowledge in with the data science knowledge. Yeah, so yeah, these are just fancy technical terms. Feature engineering just means how to get the best predictors into your model. There's also this issue of data aging. You know, I said maybe we have the last 10 years worth of tows. Well, more data is better, but more data very often means that we're using increasingly older data. Are we going to use the last 3 years examples, the last 5 years? Yeah.
So I was sharing with him an example.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know if any of you have done your DNA or ancestry.com, right? My whole genealogy has changed. My DNA has changed since I began. I was 80% Spanish. Now I'm 40% Spanish.
Okay.
Now I'm 30% Native American, and now I'm French, which I learned French before, right? So
Yeah.
the more
Yeah.
input in there, the more information you have, the data set changes based on who you are.
My understanding is that I have more, maybe about twice as much Neanderthal than most people.
Is that boasting?
Although I would also say, and you can ponder this however you will, there is actually some interesting hints that Neanderthal ancestry and neurodivergence are related. So you think about that. Okay, so target leakage. Notice I put some exclamation marks here. It is very, very, very common, because you're using data from the past, that the answer or something about the answer will sneak into your data without you realizing it. And if that happens, what's going to happen is your model will seem much better than it really is, because it's cheating. And if I go back here to the tow truck example, notice I have a column here that's called weather. And well, you know, let's say you want to run this forecast 3 days before the day. You don't know what the weather is. You know what the weather forecast is, but the weather, we especially know this around here, the weather forecast is not always correct, right? And so if you just naively go get historical weather data in there, you're going to be making your model have precognition. It can see the future. It knows what the actual weather is on those days. And then when you run the model in the future, it won't know that. It will only know the weather forecast, so it will be less good. So this is one of a bunch of examples. There just are a lot. There are a lot of technical, but also organizational, managerial issues that can go wrong with this kind of stuff, that are sort of the fruits of hard-won, painful experiences and scarring. And so it's one of the things that I do when I'm working with companies, is just alert them to, these are a bunch of the sort of things that can go wrong. I talked about a bunch of these team management issues. I think I just want to maybe highlight two of these. One is, there's this concept in data science of a unicorn. You know, the word unicorn is used for a lot of things. Here it means somebody that can do all the computer programming, but also understands all of the AI algorithms, but also is an expert in your industry. Well, those people do exist, but they're very expensive, they're rare, they're hard to manage. And I almost always recommend instead what I refer to as a high performing team. That is to say, we're not going to look for one person that has all of this expertise. We're going to bring together 3, 4, 5 people that amongst them, they will have that expertise. I talked about integrating the people that really understand the business. I want to talk about this concept of democratization tools. People still want to build this stuff, you know, computer programming it up from the ground too much by themselves. There really are a bunch of platforms that will do much of this work for you. building the models, deploying the models, monitoring the models, changing the models over time, giving you interpretive tools. That company, Data Robot there, that's the one that I worked for. That's the last place I worked. They're really good, but there's a bunch of others. And so if you're going down this road, don't start or don't be overly influenced by the data scientist who wants to build everything from scratch. You're almost always better off using some of these, as they call them, democratization tools. Democratization really meaning people that aren't computer programmers can use them.
Is it like an open source?
They're not, some of them have pieces. So Data Robot, the actual algorithms inside Data Robot are open source from the scikit-learn Python machine learning library, but it's in a big wrapper of proprietary software.
So it's the function that's proprietary.
Yeah, well, and there's just a lot more than simply building the model. If you want to be deploying it into an enterprise environment, that just takes a lot more functionality. Next thing I want to talk about is model interpretation. There's been this long-standing lore in predictive AI that you can't understand what the models are doing. Sometimes people will say, oh, well, it's a black box. It gives us answers, we don't know why. My view is that is a complete misconception, and that is just categorically not true. And what I mean by that is you can answer any reasonable question you want to know about what a predictive AI model is doing. And what I mean by that, for example, is what are the most important features? Features is just the technical term for predictors. How do the predictions depend? Like I was giving you the example of employee retention. Well, maybe one of the predictors of employee retention is how long has it been since somebody's gotten a raise? Maybe that's an important predictor. Well, how important, right? You can absolutely quantify that. How good is the model overall? Let me give you this, this particular example of, let's say you're trying to build a model to predict mortgage default risk. You're a lender, you're going to lend people money for their mortgages, and you want to know the chance that they're going to default. So again, we have here historical data from the past. So we know the answer. Did they default or not? Yes or no? And then we have some predictors here. We have the loan amount compared to the value of the house. What's the person's income? How many years have they been in their job? What's their credit score? How much did the house appreciate in the last year? What's their gender? You're probably wondering about this column. If we have time, I'll say more about that. And then the answer. Well, let's say I wanted to know, for example, how much does the model depend on this, on how much the house value appreciated in the last year? Well, what I can do is I can take my data table, run it through the model, get all the predictions, and because I know the answers, determine how good it is, how good the predictions are, how accurate the model is, however you want to measure that. And then what I do is I take this one column and I shuffle it. I just randomly reassign these values. That might initially sound crazy, but bear with me. If I randomly reassign these, like take this one, put it here, take this one, put it here, this one goes there, just randomly reshuffle this column. Well, what am I doing? I'm destroying the information in that column. If I've randomly assigned an appreciation to you, it cannot possibly have any predicted value. So then with that column shuffled, run through the model, get predictions, see how good they are. They're going to be worse. They're going to be worse. Why are they going to be worse? Because I destroyed the information in one of the columns. But the question is, how much worse? And notice that I can do this without any reference to what the model is. It could be a regression model, it could be a random forest, it could be a neural network, it could be anything. It doesn't matter what the model is, I can always do this. And so this is just one example of the point I want to make is, if anybody is trying to sell you machine learning or predictive AI models or black boxes and they cannot be interpreted, send them to me. They absolutely can be interpreted. That is an urban legend.
I mean, unless that's a largely irrelevant column, right?
Well, that's what you would find out is let's say you shuffle this column and you run through the model and it's just as good. Right. Then yes, then you've demonstrated this is not useful information. Exactly right. Yes. I'm gonna skip that. I talked about this, but let me just make the point here. When we're building these predictive models, we're always using examples from the past. We're using examples from the past to make predictions in the future. So there's an assumption there. The assumption is that the future is going to be like the past, but it's not. But it's not, right? And so what's inevitably going to happen is that over time, your model performance is going to degrade. And you should be prepared from the outset that you will want to update and refresh your model periodically. You might just do it on the calendar, like once a month we do it, whatever. Or you might say, okay, we're going to monitor its performance. And once it gets to some particular level of badness, that'll be our trigger to update the model. But you just need to keep this in mind, because when people are thinking about deploying these in production environments, there are ways to do it that make the updating system relatively more painful versus relatively less. I mean, if you put your predictive AI model into a system where you have to rebuild and recompile your entire production environment, that's hard, right? So you want to think about, how do we do this in a way that is not hard. The last topic I want to talk about is bias and fairness. So this is my favorite image of, I guess, unfairness. So we're back to definitions, because bias and fairness is a very important issue. But it's also important how we think about it. We have to think about it carefully. I think it starts with a definition. My definition of fairness is treating people that are similar in relevant ways similarly, and not treating people that are different in irrelevant ways differently. That makes sense? That's my definition of fairness. So we got two boys here, the two 10-year-old boys in striped polo shirts. One gets a burger with it. This is not fair, right? This is viscerally feels not fair, right? But as I said, there are subtle issues of fairness. And as I said, you might have been wondering about my including this column, gender, in the mortgage default table. And in fact, depending on what legal jurisdiction you're in, it might be illegal to use this information. It might be illegal to even collect this information. Okay, well, what are the implications of that? Well, let's say I omit this column, that I don't include this gender column. That means that I'm going to be determining default risk based on only the other columns, and in particular on the income column. Now, it's still true to this day that women on average earn less than men. But it is also true that for the same income level, women default at a lower rate than men. So if I eliminate this column, then I am bucketing women with men that have the same income, which means that those women at that income level, whether it's 60,000 a year or 158,000 a year, whatever it is, they're bucketed with men at that same income level, because we're not thinking about gender anymore, which means that those women are sharing the risk of the men at that income level. I think it is an objectively true fact. This part is not up for debate. It is an objectively true fact that if you eliminate this column, more women will be turned down for mortgages. You see how that is? And so what should be done, you can think about that. But my point here is simply to say that these issues of bias and fairness can be actually quite subtle. And sometimes people try to apply solutions that are too simple and can have unintended consequences. Okay, I think, am I done? Yeah. Oh, no, I mean, this is, of course, my shameless self-promotion slide. This is what I do. And so I work with businesses to help them roadmap or review their strategy, or help staff their team, or even project management. So that's what I do.
What size businesses or industries are most appropriate for your type of help?
I like to work with companies, and I look for companies that are between 10 million and $100 million in revenue, so that they have a substantial enough scale of operations that incremental improvements mean something, but not so big that they're going to have their own team of experts. I guess the other thing I would say, particularly for this group, and because we're in this venue, I'm also very open to working with early stage companies that are interested in adding an AI product or service to what they're doing.
Who are also might be servicing those type of businesses.
Sure.
One of the things you talked about is finding the rights data to correlate with the outcomes that you want. And, presumably if you had a data set of all possible sources of data, you'd get false correlations. Can you talk about the help that you've given companies and your experience to find the right sources of data? Maybe data that isn't even collected or data they hadn't thought about. If you don't have the data, you can't make the prediction.
So but thank you for asking that, because to me, this is sort of, there's a very famous for data scientist, Sergey Jurgensen, one of like, I don't know if anyone knows, but there are competitive rankings for data scientists, and Sergey has been one of the top ranked. Anyway, Sergey's thing, what he says is feature engineering, which is what you're describing, what to put in those columns. He says, feature engineering is the art part of data science. And to me, it is, yes, it is fun, it is interesting, it is engaging. If I'm working on a project, it's like kind of like what I'm thinking about when I go home at the end of the day. What I'm thinking about in the morning is, what are the things that exist in the world that are controlling the thing we're trying to predict that we don't have in our model? And I'll finish with one, I think, good example, which was working with a federal government agency on employee retention. And so they had all of the obvious predictors, like how long has it been since someone's had a raise and what was their last performance evaluation? Also, who is their boss? I've had two different organizations who did not want to include that column. I think they don't want to know the importance of who's the boss. But in the case of this government agency, what they eventually realized was an important piece of information was commute time. This was in Washington, D.C. For some people, it was more than an hour each way to go from home to work and back. And that was not something they had in their data table, but it was not that hard to say, okay, where does this person live? Where's their office? What's the commute time? And that turned out to be an important predictor that was not originally being captured. So much so that the organization eventually started putting satellite offices in the suburbs to sort of help with this.
I see in your slide, maybe someone else might have mentioned it. When you see the market growth, can you give us kind of a number? And of course, there's different verticals. But where do you see the market as far as either a percentage or a dollar amount?
I don't think I can quantify. I'm huge. I don't think I think what I would say is, I think the most important thing is I've made kind of a study over time of how mature companies handle technology transitions. So, and basically they don't. I mean, you know, it's easy to come up with examples like Kodak that absolutely could see the train wreck coming and still somehow were incapable of doing it. But then there are exceptions. And one of my favorite exceptions is Verizon. You may know that Verizon used to be New York Telephone Company. They were for a century, they were running the telephone lines, you know, in New York City and also in New England. They saw what was coming, they adapted, they became the #1 cellular company in the country. So it can be done. But the truth of the matter is, it is extremely hard for big companies to innovate for all kinds of cultural and external incentive reasons. And so I think this is not quite answering your question, but maybe it's relevant. What we will see, I have no question, over the next decade is enormous creative destruction. That is to say, some of the biggest companies in the country or in the world right now will be hobbled or gone 10 years from now because they will go through a Kodak-like experience.
It's got to be $1 trillion market.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
A couple things. So I mainly focus, so I do consulting on small businesses. And so I want to kind of get your ideas and thoughts on generative AI processes. Like, obviously, I understand you're probably more focused on the predictive side, which is the number side and all those calculations. And then secondary automation, because I think for me, one of the most important things is learning how to automate some of those processes through and utilizing AI. So
I think maybe the most useful observation for you to make is, it's going to be 100 flowers blooming. That is to say, it's not just one thing people have made really good analogies to like when electronics started being used widely in the middle of the 20th century. And it wasn't like every company said, we're doing electronics now. Instead, it was 100 or 1,000 different things, right? And these came from individual people working on individual problems. So I'm actually it's rather than working with companies that we are an AI company and we're going to go dominate the world because we are an AI company. I am actually much, much more interested in taking mature industries and figuring out how to transform those. And I'll give you two examples. One is, it just happens to be a company that I'm in discussions with right now, ready mix cement. Yeah, that's a pretty mature, pretty fundamental industry. And yet there are clear opportunities there. Another one would be dry cleaning. Like why is the dry cleaning industry so screwed up? Why is there not a national chain of dry cleaners like Supercuts or something like that? So I think, again, I feel like I'm giving you a tangential answer because I can't really answer the question you asked, but the tangential answer is, I think some of the most exciting opportunities are pick a particular vertical, and it absolutely can be quite a mature industry, and figure out how that industry is going to transform.
For his answer then, his question, how do you generate AI in that vertical?
Yeah, so I think it's finding those narrow applications, and often that comes from the bottom up. That is to say, you make the tools available to people that are doing the work every day, and they'll figure out, I use it to this point, and then I put it here, then I massage it. There is a huge amount already, of course, of people using these systems to create first drafts. That's another way to say what I said earlier, which is it gets you 80% of the way there. So if I was a salesperson that wanted to do personalized outreach to the 200 prospects in my database once a month, I would certainly be interested in how do I get an AI system to read what's in the Salesforce file for that customer, to know everything we know about that customer, draft a follow-up message to them, but then I'm going to read it and I may edit it, I may add, I may subtract, but I can do this 2 or 3 times more efficiently because I'm being handed the first drafts.
Yeah, and I actually do that. You can actually take somebody's LinkedIn account from a sales perspective, and I can input their information there, and then I ask it to tell me who they are, their beliefs, their values, their ideas, who they are.
Yeah,
and then I can basically ask it to give me questions that would be viable to that person in the meeting. So I'll set my meeting up based on what AI, obviously if it's of value. So I utilize it that way.
I also feel like you have to be careful though, right? Because if you start coming across with an AI taint,
and I agree, there has to be authenticity, right? But it's your input into AI that gives it its authenticity.
Yeah.
I'm worrying that like when AI, now you're talking about 80%.
Yeah.
When it's getting better, like 95%
Yes.
or 97%, 98%, then people will not reading it because 2% change is wrong.
Yeah. It's worth pointing out the stated goal of OpenAI, the organization that creates ChatGPT, on their website. What they say they are there to do is basically, quote unquote, they want to create general artificial intelligence that is able to outperform humans at most economically valuable work. That's the way they say it. That's what they say publicly, right? This is their stated public position. They want to create software that is better at most economically valuable work. And well, yeah, as I said at the outset, there's a lot we could say about the political and social and cultural implications. There are big political and cultural and social implications of that, but that's maybe a conversation for another time. So we've run over. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.